NSW. Forensic scientists of Reddit. What is the most WTF case that you ever had? Worked at Anmes for a bit. Had a couple pass away from a 2-person plane crash. When the autopsy began, it smelled a bit like burnt barbecue and the people in the body bags weren't in your typical dead lying flat position. They were kind of stuck in a fetal position-ish. Opened up the bag and I saw weird bumps on each of their heads. Asked the ME what was up with the bumps. I guess at high temps the brain expands and needs somewhere to go. At some point it just kinda pops out of the skull. So their brains were some inside some outside of skull. Then we try examining the body, and it looks like a cheap prop from a movie. I notice a wedding band on the female passenger and try my best to remove it. The whole finger comes off with it. Felt kinda bad. Then I spent 10 minutes trying to clean off what I can only imagine was human grease and burnt flesh off the ring so we could package it up and eventually return it to the family. Plane crashes are pretty crazy. One of the best cases on forensic files was cold case that had gone unsolved for decades. A man told police he had picked up a hitchhiker in the evening. After the man and the hitchhiker got into a fight, the man threw him out of his car 2 miles away from his mother's house on a busy highway. The man later came home to his mother's house only to find the hitchhiker at his mother's house. He left to go call police from a payphone. This was before cell phones. The police found his mother dead in bed. The man was a beneficiary of a huge life insurance policy and was the prime suspect. The cops or anyone did not believe the man's story. It was inconceivable that the hitchhiker, who did not know where the mother's house was, could make a 2-mile journey with turns in a neighborhood to just randomly break in and kill the man's mother, who he didn't know. But there was blood at the scene and a palm print on the staircase that was not the man's nor the mother's. After some investigation, people at Hardee's did confirm that there was a man that fit the description looking to hitchhike. Still, they just assumed the man had paid the other man to kill his mother. 15 years later, after the invention of CODIS, the DNA was matched to a career criminal who definitely matched the description of the hitchhiker. After bringing him in and interrogating him, the killer had no idea he had killed the mother of the man who gave him a ride. He simply walked through this neighborhood looking for a house that looked empty and his mother's was the only one without the lights on. It's baffling. Crime scene tech here. This one stands out as I was still training at the time. Suicide by gunshot. Guy went to an indoor range and rented a monster of a revolver. A judge if I recall correctly. This thing could shoot 410 shot shells. The force basically blew the top of his head off. What remained of the skin from the top of his head was flapped into the skull cavity and his eyes looked like they were bulging out. Blood and brains up to 10 featuring away. Found his safety goggles about 10 yards downrange. The scariest part was he was watching others shoot beforehand. Sometimes I wonder if he planned to take others with him. It was a long time ago. Retired now. My ME unit investigated overflow cases. Basically cases that the main unit wouldn't need to waste resources on. Came down to us. We would get things like accidents and suicides. Open and shut. Sometimes we got more intense cases. The one that stuck. It was the first time they actually warned me before opening the body bag. The death was reported as an accident. He fell from the balcony of his apartment on the 12th floor into the tree beside the building, hitting every branch on the way down. Turn out his mother pushed him. The result was a grotesque mess. I was at a regional medical center in rural Guatemala when we had a case come in from an OTA, road traffic accident, involving a pedestrian and a chicken bus. For those of you who don't know, a popular but incredibly dangerous form of public transport are retired American school buses that have been painted all sorts of vibrant colors, but underneath the mechanics are shot to crap. Anyway, this pedestrian had been hit by one of these rolling death traps which was fully loaded going around 80 miles per hour and ended up getting wrapped under the front right wheel arch and completely mangled beyond recognition. They found bits of this guy spread 2 kilometers down the road as the initial impact had split his torso down the middle and basically turned him inside out. When all the bits had been collected, the height of the body bag was around 2 inches, so you imagine the state of the remains. Passers-by helped us pick up bits from the side of the road, but dogs and cats ran off with a fair amount of the smaller bits. Guatemala is a cool place. Not a forensic scientist, but I majored in anthropology with a focus on forensic anthropology. Given that, I was a fairly regular reader of the Forensic Science Quarterly. Here are a couple that I remember. Kid found on top of an elevator in a 6-story dorm. Apparently he was elevator surfing, which is just as dumb as it sounds. He somehow got his head caught in the cables and got it twisted around a couple of times. This did not immediately kill him. He died from asphyxiation. This means he had anywhere from 30 seconds to a couple of minutes to contemplate what had happened to him before he lost consciousness. Another one was sort of a mystery case. Headless corpse found in a truck in a national park. No head was to be found in the immediate area. Truck was turned on but had run out of gas. The wound was very clean. No sawing, almost like a guillotine cut. The investigating authorities were rather confused, but eventually they found a receipt in his pocket for 50 yards of nylon rope. They widened the investigation and eventually found the rope tied to a tree with a noose at one end. Further searching of this area eventually turned up the head. Pretty unique method of suicide. Mystery solved. This one isn't from the magazine, but a story personally related to me from the officer involved. A call comes in for a 50-ish black woman dead in a garage. Investigation reveals it is actually a 35-year-old white male. Dude put on a dress, rigged a noose to his garage door opener and proceeded to watch some pee in his garage while choking himself with a garage door opener. Battery in the remote died, and then so did he. Another case that sticks in my memory is of a guy that decided to kill himself with a .3006 and a .308. For you non-gun people, those are two very powerful calibers. Literally overkill. Anyway, this guy manages to get 2 rifles under his chin and fire them at the same time while lying on his bed. This obliterates his head. I mean, like there was nothing left but a stump. That isn't why the case sticks with me. However, what happened next is that the local forensic department decides to reconstruct the head as an exercise. They collect every piece, except for the orbital sockets, which evaporated, and put them all back together. The result came out looking very much like the victim, although slightly bug-eyed. The before and after of that is something I don't think I'll ever forget. A neighboring state had a case like the one with the nylon rope. On a 1st of April, the CSI didn't believe it at first when he received the call from dispatch for a headless body in a car that was still running. Not a crime scene guy. Used to be a first responder. Guy was sitting at a table, slumped over, with every single knife from a very nice knife set sticking out of his back, arranged just the way they were in the knife block. Wife was standing there, still yelling at him for dying too soon. He had it coming. He had it coming. He only had himself to blame. If you'd been there, if you'd seen it, I betcha you would have done the same. Retired Undertaker here. Duck hunter in gear found dead on front porch. Looked like shotgun went off and hit him, close range in the chest. Got him back to funeral home for autopsy. Small town. He had been stabbed about 30 times. A dog was reportedly spotted laughing near the crime scene. A lot of times family would rather you declare it a suicide instead of death by autoerotic asphyxiation. I would like to add that I am not a forensic scientist. I just interned for a crime lab and always thought it was fricked up. Yep. Dude from my high school committed suicide and the school even has a day set aside to wear orange to honor the kid's death. But it turns out he wasn't suicidal. Just trying to get off while using a belt and couldn't get the belt off either. His parents found him in his room naked with a belt 45 minutes later. Self-inflicted GSW. Pistol in each hand. 1 entrance wound, 1 exit wound. 2 spent shell casings. Neighbors report 2 shots fired. No bullet holes in ceiling, walls, furniture, windows, nothing. Sat at the scene for an hour with Emmy and 2 officers searching everything, but the bullets never turned up. Still scratching my head. It was a definite textbook suicide W motive and signed suicide note. 1 gun in each hand, each fired by the deceased. No nearby windows, no open doors, no wounded victims running away into the night. Nothing was moved. There wasn't a murder. It's strange that the search turned up no bullet holes, but there are details about the deceased that would solve it for you guys that I'm not going to post online for the sake of his anonymity. Jesus guys. No open windows. There is a very large difference between an entrance and an exit wound, and he was definitely not moved. Long forgotten saint sweep unhurt hairs for my inbox. Not me but my professor. This young kid, teens-ish, was playing with a loaded gun and accidentally shot himself in the face. He then tried to write "help me" on the wall with his blood. So sad. We saw the scene photos for class. For those who have questions, all the details of the case were never discussed, including where it happened, name, or circumstances surrounding it. A lot of cases my prof didn't even know the final outcome, so we heard a lot of interesting cases but never knew where they went. I ended up in an FS lab, so no CS for me. I had a professor who was an expert in osteology and would train radiologists and doctors to recognize defensive fractures in arm bones. Defending yourself from an attack can leave a very distinctive spiral fracture on your forearms, and in his years of research, he'd never encountered that specific fracture pattern anywhere except in a defensive wound, until he was attending a seminar at the University of Toronto in February, and when leaving the lecture, he was walking down an outdoor flight of stairs when someone called out to him to ask a question. He had his hands in his pockets because he wasn't wearing gloves, turned, slipped and fell while perpendicular to the steps. His forearm hit the step and resulted in the exact spiral fracture he'd never seen anywhere else. And best part is that the radiologist that examined him was someone he himself had trained to look for this sort of fracture as a warning sign for domestic violence. Digital forensics case. Executive was using way more data than anyone else on his record. The local IT guys took it to check it out for viruses and whatnot. Found lots of child pee. Guy got brought up on charges. Lost his job. Family torn apart. The whole spiel. We do our analysis. Find out there was a virus they were serving said pictures for a dark website. Only thing that got him off was the rate at which the data was accessed. He got fat restitution, but that won't put his life back together. Made me get out of the business because I know this guy was guilty for sure, but we kept finding little hints that suggested it was something other than what we thought. Had we missed something, he would be in jail as we speak. Couldn't sleep with that kind of burden. After things like this, I think it should be required that the whole public be notified that the person is innocent. Like, if they were to do a bit on the news, to legally notify the business of their innocence. I'm a specialty forensics investigator that focuses on fire and explosions. Somehow, a lady with a coffee can of gas, her husband's asphalt-covered work clothes, and a front-load dryer managed to turn the dryer into a rocket ship that launched through a plate glass window and 10 featuring into the road. We have no known models that can demonstrate how the available materials were able to launch the dryer. Attended a lecture by a pathologist once who asked us what household item someone had managed to kill themselves with. A toothbrush, a rubber band or a matchstick? He went on to tell us that a man had killed himself accidentally while trying to clean his ear out with a matchstick, punctured a blood vessel, painted a wall with his own blood, passed out and bled out on the sofa. A friend's wife does forensics field work for a sparsely populated area and had said that only one case has been noteworthy. She was asked to analyze a crime scene in a house used to manufacture M. She surveyed the outside and then proceeded with an officer to the kitchen where the basement door was located. In the basement they found a metal door bolted shut and they decided to call for bolt cutters to enter. They didn't have them at the time, so she kept examining the area and found a side door to THR room behind a furnace. The lock was jimmered open and they found a sawn-off 12-gauge shotgun had been pointed at the bolted door. The gun was loaded and the tripwire still attached to the shotgun. She described it as the most chilling experience of her career. I worked in a morgue for a while. Lots of weird things. One case in particular stands out. A man was found dead in a food truck. He looked pretty normal from the outside. After we took off his clothes, things started looking a bit odd. He was wearing women's underwear that had holes cut in them for his dong. He probably had on around 20 pairs of the underwear. He also had a dong pump on his dong with a few condoms on. I don't remember what the cause of death was. Wonder what his family thought about it. Maybe not the most gruesome, but definitely one of the weirder things I saw. Two brothers out hunting. The older one, 14, shot the younger one, 12, accidentally when he saw deer. He hit his brother square in the back of the head, which leaves quite the exit wound on the other side. Yes, he did flip him over and see what he did. Feel bad for the kid. Most WTF. See kid on her period with a week-old pad. Yes, she used the same one for a week. Threw it at a cell good. I got to take pictures of the pad. Was pretty gross, but at least I didn't get hit by the pad. The coolest forensic story I heard was in a forensic math seminar a few years back. This case was, I think, used as inspiration for an episode of Bones. A guy killed his daughter but didn't report her missing until 8 or 9 months later. When they did find her remains, they were able to prove that she had died months before. The father claimed that he last saw her because there was a wasp nest in her skull. That particular breed of wasp only builds nests in dry places, so she had to have already been decomposed prior to their nest building season. Woman told me she would mail us a discreet sample for her paternity test. FedExes us a huge couch cushion with the tiniest CM stain on it ever. I work in digital forensics. All the most WTF stuff has been pedo related, not in how horrible they are, but in how illogical the suspect's physical tastes were. This is a story from my fake uncle, a forensic officer who has leading a team of juniors in a suicide case. The victim of the suicide had filled a water pressure base fire extinguisher with explosive material. He didn't go into detail, and hugged it like a teddy bear. Naturally, when he went off and out with a bang, he went all over the roof, walls and floor. My uncle proceeded to find a foot with all the tendons hanging out and paraded it in front of the juniors and pulled all the tendons, making the toes wiggle. His only regret was not finding a hand. Always fun around the most macabre of my father's friends. This little piggy went to the market. Every crime scene I've been to, fricking splodge everywhere. Semen in the carpet, semen in the corpse, semen in the curtains, semen in the beard. I don't think you should be jerking off at a crime scene. I once asked a paramedic his absolute worst job story. There was a vehicular accident he attended. An absolutely immense woman driving a Ford Pinto slammed into a cattle truck carrying calves. Before he got on scene, some person, who had arrived before, realizing this was primo veal, went nuts picking it up for their use. The huge woman had literally, not figuratively, exploded at impact. After they had spent a rather lengthy time gathering this lady up in pieces, there was one rib section they never found. After completing my medical graduation, I was posted as a junior resident in the Department of Forensic Medicine. 40+ female who had suffered burn injury died due to overhydration with IV fluid. When her chest was opened, believe me, the smell hits your frontal cortex like no other smell. It was messy. Very, very messy. I was called to perform an X-ray examination on a burn victim. The victim was significantly charred. Much of the body mass had been burned away, but large portions of the quadriceps and gluteals remained intact and exposed. When I walked into the morgue through an airlock, the smell was sweet and pleasing. It smelled distinctively like barbecued chicken, and for a brief moment, made me hungry. That single case bothered me more than having carrion beetles crawl off of a body and onto my face. Not me, but someone I worked with at a pharmaceutical laboratory left to become a forensic scientist. One of the first cases was a man who repeatedly broke into a farm and had physical relations with the livestock. When he was caught and went to trial, he would only admit to having relations with the female animals, even though there was evidence for interfering with both genders. Apparently he was quite aggressive about denying the male victims. Always amused that he presumably didn't want his reputation amongst other animal diddlers being ruined. Not me, and not a forensic scientist, but my dad is a EMT. He went on a run about noses in an abandoned house that sounded like a person. It was just a cat going nuts. He said the house looked like it was from the Addams Family. When he went in, he checked the house and found a mummy hung in the closet by a belt. He says there was a lot of gay mags laying around too, so it looked like autoerotic asphyxiation. He said there was no smell either, so the guy had been dead for a while. It turns out he died 3 years ago and his neighbors just thought he moved or was foreclosed on. TLDR. My dad once found a gay mummy in the closet at the Addams Family house. Best TLDR description ever. Guess that guy never made it out of the closest. I'm not a forensic scientist, but did forensic anthropology as part of my degree. When handling a ribcage, a ton of flakes came off and ended up being lodged in my mouth, nose and eyes thanks to a friend. The flakes landed on the table and my friend jokingly blew them into my face, and that's how they ended up lodged. Not I was handling it and a load of them fell into my face. 4/10 probably wouldn't recommend it. Ribcage flakes. Theory gross. Forensic genetic in Mexico. I've seen some serious crap. I was assigned to the identification of mass graves. Over 300 bodies. Dismembered. Scattered and burned. It was just one site. We had many. Stepfather used to be a police officer and loves telling stories about crime scenes. He went on to tell us about how after a motorcycle rider was struck by a train, he went under the wheels. His torso was found about 30 feet from his legs. They were connected by an intestine. So he picked up one end of the intestine and started to wrap it up like a rope. My cousin and a coroner, and the worst was he came to get a body in a trailer. During the summer, the man had been dead at least a week and had burst. He said the smell was the worst of his life. He and the other guy were up to their ankles in fluids and had to throw out his clothes and shoes. His boss felt so bad that he bought them each a new pair of like $300 shoes. Not me, but there was a great case that I can't currently find on Google. I hope it was true. A woman was found dead in her bed with blood everywhere. And I mean everywhere. There were wine glasses, or drinking glasses, throughout the house with blood in them. I think blood may have been smeared about as well. So the investigators assume some bizarre ritual, a gang of people, the whole 9 yards. Long story short, she had some strange clotting problem and was bleeding out of her mouth for an extended period of time. She probably got hazy from the loss of blood and was just trying to not make a mess in her house, so she kept spitting the blood in glasses. Eventually she was overcome and died in her bed. There's a crime scene photo somewhere of a man who committed suicide by putting himself through a bandsaw. He rigged it up specifically for the purpose. It was on the old Ogrish site, before it became Liver Lake. I'm still active on Ogrish forums, so I may be able to dig it up. I'm good. Thanks for the offer. I did an internship at a PD 1 year. I got to be with the forensic team for a week. I got to see the aftermath of what a stabbing looks like. A 113 stab wound aftermath. Yes, 113 is correct. Unreal amounts of blood. Used a kitchen knife. Upon first inspection it appeared like a dozen because there was so much blood on the body they couldn't tell how many there actually was. Gruesome. I was a forensic scientist for over 30 years. During that time I have worked on just about every kind of bizarre atrocity that you can imagine. Debauchery, murder, incest, torture, cannibalism. I'm sure the details would either gross you out or excite you, or both. The thing is that at the end of the day, when I look back on these thousands of cases, the only feeling I have is the sense of tragedy and loss. This is especially true of the victims and their families, but also, to some extent, the perpetrators and their families as well. The frustrating thing about forensic science is that you are always reacting to a crime that has been committed. You don't prevent anything and you don't save anybody. The most that you can say is that you help in bringing about closure for all concerned, or perhaps curtail the activity of a serial criminal. I have found that as the years have passed and I reflect on my career, the memories of the gory details fade and have been replaced with compassion, empathy and respect for those people whose lives were tragically altered. Before I got into digital forensics, I worked a case as a patrol deputy, where a guy committed suicide by tying a rope to a light pole and opening the tailgate of his Ford Explorer and running the rope into the truck and around his neck. He then accelerated through the parking lot until the rope ran all slack out and popped his head off. The truck crashed and we found his head in the backseat floorboards. I am not a forensic scientist, but I did major in it while in school for a while before switching. We had this one professor who was older and he was good guy. He worked in the Detroit Police Department for years, different branches I guess you would call it. Homicide, hostage negotiation, stuff like that. We would go over old cases all the time in the class, and the one that stuck out to me was, he had a teenager who apparently hated his parents. The teenager decides he wants to kill himself while his parents are out of town. So he turns up his heat to an ungodly temperature and shoots himself in the head. He was there for 3 or 4 days if I recall correctly. The parents came home to described by my teacher the most freaking foul thing he's ever smelled and seen. The parents moved out of the house after not being able to get rid of the smell apparently. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.